They said her skin glowed like candlelight in the dark, not from beauty, but from what she did to preserve it. Georgia, 1840, a plantation wrapped in magnolia silence and rotting wealth. A lady of the house whose rituals were never written in the ledgers, but whispered through generations of servants trembling in the night. She believed purity could be absorbed through power, and that sin could be washed away not by prayer, but by sweat. Every dawn, the slaves were forced into the fields before sunrise. The lady would stand at her balcony, pale and motionless, watching their backs glisten under the punishing heat. When the air grew thick, she would send her maids to collect it. Rags, soaked with human salt and pain, the byproduct of her empire's suffering. Those rags would be wrung into her porcelain basin, drop by drop. And when the house fell silent, she would step into it, naked, unashamed, whispering that she was taking their strength. But what no one knew, not the overseers, not even her own husband, was that she wasn't the first. Her family came from a lineage that believed in absorption, a kind of aristocratic alchemy that thrived on domination. To them, sweat wasn't filth. It was a sacred essence, distilled human will. The plantation became her private temple, and every night her ritual grew darker. Visitors described her differently with each passing year. Eyes that no longer blinked, veins faintly blue like river channels under her skin, and a scent, not of perfume, but of something alive, something wrong. And when the first slave fell dead from exhaustion, her physician didn't question why she demanded his body be burned immediately. He didn't ask why her hands trembled, or why her skin seemed younger the next day, because he had seen it once before, in another estate, another mistress, another century. What you're hearing now was never meant. By 1840, the South was a theater of illusion. Lace curtains, silver spoons, and Bibles open to verses about obedience. But behind those perfumed parlors, something primal moved. On that plantation, the air itself seemed to recoil. Servants whispered that the lady's mirrors had to be covered during her baths, because the glass reacted. It fogged instantly even when cold, as if something within her could not stand reflection. Her name, now erased from family records, appears only in one surviving diary, belonging to her sister. In faint ink, the sister wrote, "She says the heat makes her holy, that their pain feeds her. I no longer recognize her voice. It hums when she speaks." At first, people thought it was hysteria, the kind that Southern doctors diagnosed in women who were too emotional. But there was nothing emotional about her. She was methodical. She kept a ledger, not for cotton yields, but for the men she drained. She noted their age, strength, and the number of hours they were kept working before the rags were collected. A scientist of suffering. And her husband, a man respected, feared, called colonel though he had never served, was not blind. He saw her nightly rituals. He saw the crimson tint in her bathwater. But he didn't stop her, because the profits kept rising. Her land seemed to flourish when others wilted. Crops grew faster. The soil stayed damp long after rain. She said it was because the land loves me. But even the land has limits. Animals refused to go near her quarters. Horses reared, dogs whimpered, and one evening a maid was found strangled by her own rosary, as if her faith had turned on her. And then came the storms, weeks of endless rain. Witnesses claimed lightning struck her balcony 6 times, yet the house never caught fire. The slaves said it was the sky trying to burn her clean. The townsfolk whispered she was no long. There's a reason no portrait of her survives. Every painting commissioned either blackened or peeled within months. Artists blamed humidity, but one wrote privately that her eyes were not fit for capture. he said when he looked too long. He felt drained, like she was studying him from inside the canvas. She started locking herself in her bathing chamber for hours. No light, no sound, but the drip of liquid from porcelain. The servant said she whispered names into the water, one by one, the names of the men who'd collapsed under the Georgia sun, and when she rose, she didn't dry herself with cloth. She let it absorb. Soon, she stopped aging. Witnesses noticed. Women envied. Men feared. She moved like something preserved, not alive, a calm perfection that unsettled everyone who looked too long. The doctor who visited her to check her heart wrote, "There is no pulse where one should be, yet she breathes. God forgive me, she breathes." One night, a runaway slave returned, not to escape, but to warn the others. He said the lady had trapped the spirits of the broken and was feeding off their sorrow. He spoke of seeing lights move under the floorboards of her chamber, like fireflies that screamed. The overseer shot him on sight. But before he fell, he said, "She drinks the heat of us. The field cries for mercy." The next morning, every cotton plant in the southern field had turned black, not burned, blackened, as though the life had been sucked out of the soil itself. And yet, she smiled. For the first time in months, she smiled. "They're ready," she said to her maid. "The earth has learned its place." What no one saw that day, except the maid who later disappeared, was what she buried beneath the blackened field, a basin of her used bathwater, sealed under a slab of white marble, carved with a symbol she claimed came from her bloodline's book. That basin, the deeper you dig into her story, the more the records start to disappear. Courthouse archives lost to fire, family Bibles with pages torn out. Even the census of 1840 lists the plantation by name, but omits its mistress entirely. It's as if she had been erased from existence, or perhaps she had learned how to erase herself. But a few fragments remain. Letters, receipts, a single torn ledger found in the ruins of the house after the Civil War. In it, a line written in an unfamiliar hand reads, "Salt is the keeper of spirit. Sweat is the currency of dominion." That line appears again, not in English, in a French occult manuscript dating back to 1681, recovered from a burned monastery near Avignon. The sigil on her marble basin matched one from that very text, Le Livre des Absorptions Humaines, the Book of Human Absorptions. So who taught her this? Who whispered the secret that human sweat, human suffering, could purify or empower? Her family had come from old European stock, landowners who dabbled in spiritual medicine. One ancestor, a baroness in 1710, was accused of bathing in the blood of her servants, not to kill them, but to draw out vitality. History softened the tale, changed it, sanitized it, but the pattern never stopped. Each generation carried the ritual further, from blood to breath to sweat, the purest form of the living essence. When the lady's sister fled the plantation, she wrote one last letter to a priest in Savannah. It was never delivered, found sealed in a drawer nearly a century later. It read, "I hear them under the floorboards. They do not scream, they hum. She says the sound comforts her. I believe she has crossed into something that was never meant for flesh." And that's when it began. The hum. The slaves heard it at night, a low, steady vibration in the walls. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was the house itself, learning to breathe. That sound was later reported by Union soldiers who camped near the ruins in 1864. They left before dawn. Their commanding officer noted simply, "The ground hums. The men refuse to stay another night." But what if that hum wasn't the house, or the wind, or madness? What if it was her, still feeding, still whispering from whatever she became. Because energy never dies, it only changes form. And she had learned how to drink it. By the middle of her reign, the plantation was no longer measured in acres or bushels of cotton. It was measured in hours of labor, drops of sweat, and the silence that followed. Slaves began to speak of her as something unnatural. The lady without night. They said she walked in sleep, that her skin seemed to ripple like water, that she could call a man's name without speaking it. Her chamber became a place none dared enter. The walls were sealed in cedar, soaked in oil, and marked with symbols scratched into the wood. Servants whispered that beneath the floorboards was a hidden basin, a place where her baths became something more, a ritual of binding. No one knew exactly what she was binding, but everyone felt the change. Her husband grew quieter. His public appearances dwindled. The overseers began to whisper she no longer needed him, that she was feeding on something far beyond his reach. He kept her secrets, but he paid for them in his own way. His health wasted, his voice reduced to murmurs. There is one account of a man who survived her chamber, a runaway caught near her quarters. He said she stood before him naked, dripping with sweat, her skin shimmering like oil. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "It is the weight of the world, and I drink it to make myself lighter." He swore she pressed her palm to his chest, and he felt the air leave his lungs, not through force, but by some quiet pulling of life. That man was found dead 3 days later, his body unmarked, except for a faint salt stain on his chest. The slaves began to fear her bath more than her whip. To them, it wasn't punishment, it was consumption. And they began to whisper, "She is building herself a vessel, and the vessel will never rest." The pattern is chilling. Across history, there are tales of those who attempt to trap the essence of others, not for wealth, not for glory, but fire or immortality. And all of them end the same way, in silence. By the time the Civil War reached her lands, her name was already a ghost. But the plantation remained, untouched, strange, humming under storm clouds. Those who dared enter after the war spoke of a basin, still warm, still smelling of sweat and earth. And that hum was still there. By now, you must be wondering, what became of her? And more importantly, what became of those she bathed in her slaves' sweat? She vanished without record. No funeral, no grave, just silence. By 1865, the plantation lay in ruin, burned, pillaged, abandoned. Yet the ruins carried a secret that would not die. The basin beneath the floorboards survived. When discovered decades later, it contained nothing but a thick black residue and a faint odor no chemist could explain. A mixture of iron, earth, and something almost human. Local legends began to swirl. They said if you stand near the ruins at midnight, you can hear her voice, soft, coaxing, humming. Some claimed the hum carried instructions, others said it was a warning. The phrase most often repeated by those who heard it, "Come to the water, come to me." Her story spread quietly, carried in whispers by descendants of the enslaved. In the decades after the war, her name became taboo. Families refused to speak it aloud, but they passed down the warning, not of her cruelty, but of her method, that somewhere in the South there were those who still believe human suffering is not just to be endured, but harvested. Anthropologists who later visited the site were puzzled. They recorded anomalous readings, heat under the soil where no fire had burned, traces of a salt compound never seen before, and an unnatural hum that no instrument could explain. Even the vegetation around the ruins grew in strange patterns, as though arranged deliberately. The most chilling account came in 1923, when a group of men exploring the site vanished without trace. Only their tools were found, resting neatly by the ruins. No footprints, no bodies, just the hum. And that hum is still there. Historians argue she was merely a madwoman. Occult scholars insist she was a practitioner of an ancient rite, something far older than the Civil War, older than the plantation itself, a ritual tied to dominion, to immortality, to the absorption of essence. If they are correct, then the question is not whether she lived forever, but whether she still lives now. Voice deepens, slow and deliberate, because energy does not vanish, it only transforms, and somewhere, buried beneath Georgia's earth, she left hers behind, a truth wrapped in sweat, silence, and a ritual the world was never meant to know. Halfway through this journey, I want you to stop and write this phrase in the comments, twice, not for me, but for yourself. The hum has spoken. The hum has spoken. By doing so, you are not only locking your awareness, you are locking your place in what comes next. The phrase you just wrote in the comments, "The hum has spoken," is not just a slogan. It is a key, a turning point, because from here on, the story stops being about a plantation. It stops being about one woman. It becomes about a system, a mechanism older than any record we have, a truth hidden beneath centuries of power and silence. What she practiced in Georgia in 1840 was not a singular madness. It was a discipline of control, a doctrine passed down quietly through aristocracy and clergy, a doctrine that turns suffering into influence. Sweat, in her case, was the currency. But the principle exists everywhere. Pain is the root of obedience. Fear is the root of dominion. And control is the root of immortality. This is why her disappearance mattered so little to the world at large. She was not destroyed. She was absorbed into something larger. The plantation decayed, but her ritual became part of the whispered inheritance of power. Men who ruled states, corporations, and armies have used the same principle, not always consciously, but the pattern remains: extraction of life, transformation of it, and reinvestment in self. That is the real corruption, not slavery alone, not war alone, but the hidden system that turns human existence into fuel. That is why this story matters now, because it's still happening, in boardrooms, in governments, in your own life, if you know where to look. You might think this is metaphysical speculation, but listen, the hum that the slaves heard in Georgia is not confined to a ruin. It is in every silence where power meets suffering. It is the unspoken contract of control, and to ignore it is to participate in it. Some researchers have traced her lineage to secret societies, lodges that speak in symbols, pass in silence, and call themselves keepers of the ancient rites. They claim her ritual was only the first of many, the prototype of a system still alive today. A system built on the absorption of essence, sweat, fear, labor, loyalty, not through force alone, but through consent disguised as ritual. You are hearing this now not by accident. This is why I spoke the phrase aloud for you earlier. Because knowledge like this demands a choice. You must decide if you will turn away or go deeper. And if you choose to go deeper, know this: the deeper you descend, the harder it becomes to return. By this point, you should sense the shift. The story is no longer a single chapter of cruelty. It has become a map of power disguised as tradition, of dominion disguised as ritual. The plantation lady was not the exception. She was the rule. And her baths, her absorption of sweat, were the clearest expression of a truth every empire keeps hidden. That truth is this: power does not only take life, power feeds on life, not metaphorically, but literally. Sweat, toil, obedience, they are all forms of energy, and energy, once taken, can be transformed. It can be stored. It can be weaponized. The rituals she practiced were a language of domination. Every drop of sweat was proof of submission. Every sacrifice of will became fuel for her own vitality. And every humiliation suffered by the enslaved became part of her power. This was her law, her covenant, her inheritance. But there is a second part to her teaching. It is what makes her story dangerous to know. The second part is that this energy, once consumed, changes the consumer. It transforms them into something not entirely human, something beyond flesh, something eternal. That is why she vanished without a body, not because she died, but because she had crossed into another form of existence, a form sustained by the energy she had harvested, a vessel that could endure beyond death itself. The hum the slaves heard was not a sound, it was the vibration of that transformation. It was the resonance of something living, something made of suffering and power. And that resonance is not confined to Georgia in 1840. It is alive now. It is the echo of every system built on control. Look closely at the world today, and you will see her method everywhere, in politics, in commerce, in the institutions that govern our lives, the extraction of sweat, the concealment of truth, the ritual of obedience, and the quiet hum that binds it all together, lower, almost a whisper. The plantation lady was not the end of the story. She was the beginning of it, and you are now part of what comes next. This is where most men stop listening, where the comfortable withdraw, where the story becomes too dangerous to follow. But you are still here. That means you are ready to see what lies beneath. Not just the surface of her ritual, but the system it represents. Because what she practiced was not an isolated crime. It was a blueprint, a code of power hidden in plain sight. Across centuries, through empires and revolutions, there have always been those who know how to draw from the suffering of others and convert it into their own survival. The plantation ladies' baths were a physical form of this principle, but there are invisible forms too, systems of control that do not require a basin, a balcony, or even a body. They operate in silence, in structures, in the hum that you no longer hear, but live within. Consider the workhouses of the Industrial Revolution, the mines of the Congo under King Leopold, the modern sweatshops of today. The pattern is the same: sweat harvested, bodies exhausted, lives erased, and from that exhaustion, wealth and influence rise. The extraction of human energy, not merely physical labor, but spirit, will, identity, has always been the currency of power. And like her ritual, it thrives on secrecy, on disguise, on convincing those who serve that the act is natural, deserved, even holy, that obedience is the price of survival, that suffering is purification. This is the second truth hidden in her story. The most dangerous power is the power you cannot see. The hum she left behind is still vibrating in the world, in the places you would never suspect, in the agreements you never question. By now, you must understand, knowing this is not harmless. It changes you. It forces you to see control differently, to see sacrifice differently, to see yourself differently. And there is no going back after you see it, not entirely, because once you hear the hum, you can never unhear it. Let me take you deeper, because this is where her story becomes a mirror, not just of history, but of you. The plantation lady was not a singular figure of cruelty. She was the embodiment of a system of absorption. And that system still exists, not only in plantations, not only in sweatshops, but in every institution that thrives on extraction. Your job, your politics, your economy, every structure that demands your energy without returning its full value is a modern echo of her basin. Every system that hums in silence is another version of her ritual. The sweat she bathed in was not simply water and toil, It was the concentrated will of those who were broken and bound, and it was transformed into something else, something she could keep forever. This is the hidden truth of all power. It is never sustained without sacrifice. It cannot be maintained without extraction. And it is always cloaked in a story that justifies itself. For her, that story was purity. For empires, it is progress. For corporations, it is profit. For governments, it is security. For individuals, it is identity. She perfected the ritual of disguise. She clothed her hunger in ceremony. She turned brutality into devotion. And by doing so, she hid her transgression in plain sight. This is why her name was erased, not because she failed, but because she succeeded too well. The plantation is gone, the basin is lost to time, but the pattern remains, and that hum still vibrates, not just in the ruins of Georgia, but in the unseen structures of every modern hierarchy. The hum is the sound of life being taken, and those who hear it, those who understand it, stand at a dangerous crossroads. You are standing there now. That phrase you wrote earlier, "The hum has spoken," was your declaration. It marked your choice to descend further into the truth, to see the system, to recognize the ritual, to understand the sacrifice. Because the question now is not whether this system exists, it is whether you will allow yourself to participate in it, knowingly. By now, the weight of her story should press against your mind. This is no longer just a tale of a woman bathing in sweat. It is a lesson, a warning, a blueprint for how power endures. The plantation lady was not merely cruel, she was a teacher. And her teaching was this: the greatest dominion is not won through force alone. It is won through absorption. Think of it. To absorb is to take not only the work of others, but their will, their belief, their sense of self. To turn that life force into your own is the oldest form of control. Her baths were physical, yes, but the principle is spiritual, systemic. It is why slavery became more than labor. It became a doctrine. Why empires built rituals around conquest. Why institutions build their own ceremonies of compliance today. And here's the terrifying truth. Most of us are bound to this system without knowing it. We give sweat, effort, loyalty. We sacrifice time, vitality, identity. And those who absorb it seldom speak of it. Because the ritual requires secrecy, the hum must be silent for it to work. The plantation lady understood this instinctively. That is why she hid her basin beneath the floorboards, why she sealed her chamber with cedar, why her name vanished from the records. The ritual was not her crime. The concealment of it was her weapon. But concealment is fragile. Truth has a way of surfacing. Her basin was found. Her symbol was traced. The hum was heard by others, and the warning has spread quietly. To those who know how to listen, to those who refuse to turn away. If you are listening now, you stand in a rare position. Most men never choose to know this. They avoid it because it forces change. It forces choice. It forces them to see that the sweat they give, in work, in loyalty, in sacrifice, is never truly theirs to keep. So I ask you again, will you ignore the hum, or follow it, lower voice, almost a whisper? Because once you follow it, the path will take you somewhere you cannot return from, somewhere deeper, somewhere dangerous. Here is where the descent truly begins. The plantation lady's story was never meant to end with her disappearance. It was meant to continue, as a pattern, as a test, as a mirror to every system built on dominance. Because what she practiced in Georgia in 1840 was not an anomaly. It was the origin of a principle that life once given can be taken and transformed without notice. The sweat she bathed in was proof. Proof that control thrives in silence. Proof that suffering can be converted into power. Proof that obedience is not enforced solely by chains or violence, but by rituals that convince the bound they must serve. This is the core of all dominion, the unspoken transaction between the consumed and the consumer. The plantation fell. She vanished. But the ritual survived. It survived in the hum that still vibrates under ruins. It survived in every system that asks for your effort, your time, your vitality, without giving full return. It survived in every structure that cloaks extraction in virtue. This is the danger, the hidden legacy of her method. Think of every place where human life is converted into wealth without transparency. Think of every institution that asks for loyalty without revealing the cost. That is where her lesson lives. That is where the hum still speaks. And this is why knowing her story matters. Because the plantation lady is not just a figure of the past. She is a symbol of a living system. A system that hums in silence, that absorbs without acknowledgement, that hides its ritual behind respectability. And the moment you hear the hum, you will recognize it anywhere. This is no longer just history. This is a revelation, and it comes with a choice. Voice sharpens, commanding. You can step away. You can pretend it does not exist, or you can descend. You can go deeper into the hum, into the truth, into the ritual itself. Because the hum does not stop. It only grows louder the deeper you go. Now understand this. The plantation lady's bath was not merely a grotesque ritual. It was an initiation, a ceremony of transformation. She was not bathing in sweat simply to take it. She was bathing to become it, to dissolve the boundary between herself and the source of her power, to transform suffering into something permanent, something eternal. That is why she became something no one could touch, not with accusation, not with violence, not even with time. The basin under her floorboards was not a relic. It was a vessel, a crucible of dominion. The salt of human effort became the foundation of her immortality, and in her silence, after disappearance, the ritual endured. History has a way of burying such truths. We tell ourselves her baths were madness, that the whole thing was a cruel superstition. But history is not kind to those who speak of hidden systems of power. Truths like this are erased, like her name, because once the pattern is recognized, those who profit from it tremble. And that is the point. Control only works so long as the ritual remains invisible. Once it is exposed, the system begins to unravel. The hum, the living echo of her act, becomes a warning, a summons, a test of awareness. There are men today who would pay to know the secret she uncovered, that the will of the many can be folded into the power of one, that suffering is not waste, it is currency, that obedience is not submission, it is fuel. And if you are hearing this now, you are in the place where the lesson turns toward you. You must decide if you will simply observe, or if you will see it for what it is, if you will walk away, or step deeper. Voice low, intense. Because to understand the hum is to understand what lies at the heart of all control, and once you understand that, you cannot stop yourself from seeking it. Here is the hard truth few will ever admit. Power is sustained not by force alone, but by the quiet acceptance of those who serve. The plantation lady's ritual was proof of this. Her baths were not a singular crime. They were the embodiment of a principle older than kingdoms, that domination survives when the dominated absorb their own chains as virtue. She did not call it slavery. She called it purification. And therein lies the danger of her method. When suffering is reframed as necessity, when obedience is reframed as devotion, the ritual becomes invisible. The hum becomes silence, and the system endures. That is why she was never named in history, because her act was not madness. It was mastery, and mastery demands secrecy. She became a ghost in the records because her lesson was too dangerous to teach openly, but it survived anyway, in whispers, in symbols, in the architecture of control that still hums under our lives. Think of the places where you give yourself without question, your workplace, your institutions, your government. Notice how consent is framed. Notice the rituals they ask of you. Notice what they absorb from you, because those rituals are the modern echoes of her basin. They are the places where your sweat, your energy, your will is folded into something far greater than yourself, something that keeps the system alive. And here is the deeper truth you must confront. The hum she left behind is not just a sound of the past. It is a living frequency, a pattern of extraction that hums in every system built on control. It hums in politics, it hums in commerce, it hums in your own life. By now you should sense it. The hum is not a memory, it is a warning, it is a door, and it is calling to you. Lower, commanding voice. If you are still listening, if you have felt the pull of this descent, you have reached another choice point. Step away now, and you return to comfort. Step deeper, and you cross into dangerous knowledge. This is where most men falter, not because the truth is too terrible, but because the truth demands transformation. The plantation lady's story is not just history. It is an initiation into understanding how control persists, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Her baths were an act of absorption, but the principle behind them is alive today in ways far more subtle and far more dangerous. Every contract you sign, every loyalty you give, every hour of your life surrendered without return is a drop of your essence, and those who know how to harvest it will keep it, whether you consent or not. She knew this. She weaponized it, and her disappearance was the final proof, not the end of her life, but the culmination of her method. To vanish is to transcend, to shed flesh and form, and become something else, something sustained by the very energy she took, something eternal. That is why her name was erased, because the moment her ritual is named, it becomes a threat. Knowledge of it destroys obedience. It disrupts control. And those who depend on extraction will bury it again, as they buried her. But the hum remains, always, waiting for those who hear it, those willing to follow it into the depths, those willing to understand the cost of power. You stand at that threshold now. The choice before you is clear. Step back into the comfort of ignorance, or step forward into dangerous knowledge. And once you step forward, there is no return. You will begin to see the hum everywhere, in the systems that govern life, in the rituals that demand your obedience, in the silence that conceals their extraction. And you will have to decide what to do with that knowledge, because knowledge without action is another form of surrender. Voice lowers, deliberate. The hum is speaking, and now, so are you. From this point on, the story stops being about her and begins to be about the pattern she revealed. The plantation lady's baths were not an isolated crime. They were a ritual perfected through centuries, a ritual of extraction hidden behind obedience, silence, and ceremony, and it survives in every structure that hums quietly without acknowledgement. What she did in Georgia was physical, but the principle is spiritual and systemic. Sweat was her currency, pain was her fuel, obedience was her altar. She was not bathing for vanity, she was bathing to transform herself, to absorb the life of others and make it her own. That was her true dominion. Look at the world today. Look at how energy is harvested without awareness, how systems demand your effort and give little in return, how control disguises itself as tradition, duty, patriotism, even faith. That is her legacy. That is her hum. And here is the most dangerous part. Most who live within such a system never question it. They consent without realizing it. They give without knowing the cost. They sweat without recognizing the ritual. And that silence is what sustains the system. The plantation lady understood this instinctively. She concealed her basin, sealed her chamber, erased her name. She knew that the ritual only endures when it is invisible, and in the absence of her body, the ritual became a ghost, a hum that has not stopped since. That hum is not just a sound. It is a frequency, a signal, an inheritance. It is the echo of every system built on extraction and obedience. And if you hear it now, you are standing at a dangerous place, because hearing it means you can no longer walk away. Voice lowers, almost a whisper. The hum has spoken. Twice now, you have written it. And with that act, you have chosen. You have chosen to descend. You have chosen to descend. That means you are no longer an observer. You are a participant in the truth she left behind. The plantation lady's story was never meant for comfort. It was meant to be a test, to see who would turn away and who would look deeper. And you have looked. The question now is what you will do with that vision. Because knowing the hum is only the first step. The second is recognizing it everywhere, in the subtle systems around you, in the agreements you make without reading, in the labor you give without reclaiming, in the silence you keep when you witness injustice. Her ritual was about concealment, but its survival depends on consent. The hum continues only when those who hear it ignore it, when they fold their own sweat, obedience, and vitality into the system without resistance. That is why she hid her act. That is why her name was erased, so the hum could keep humming. But the hum is not just history. It is alive. It hums in boardrooms. It hums in factories. It hums in governments. It hums in your own life, in the hours you give, the energy you surrender, the obedience you accept without question. Understanding this changes everything, because it forces you to see that extraction is not always violence. Sometimes it is ritual. Sometimes it is tradition. Sometimes it is the quiet hum you only notice when you stop and listen. And that is why her story matters now, because it is not just hers. It is ours. The hum belongs to every system of control, every structure built on the absorption of life, every ritual of obedience hidden in plain sight. Voice sharpens, commanding. You have heard the hum, you have written it, you have chosen to descend. Now you must decide if you will speak it aloud or bury it like they buried her. This is where the path diverges. The plantation lady's tale is no longer hers alone. It is a living warning, a symbol of what happens when a system learns to hide its extraction in plain sight. When suffering becomes ritual, when obedience becomes devotion, when the hum becomes silence. You have descended this far. You have already crossed into dangerous knowledge, and that changes you. You begin to see the hum in places you never noticed before. The hum of factories, the hum of boardrooms, the hum in the silence of laws that serve some and sacrifice others, the hum in your own life, in the hours you surrender without return. The plantation lady mastered something the world still fears, not domination, but concealment, not cruelty, but transformation. She turned human suffering into sustenance. She turned obedience into immortality, and she erased herself so the ritual could endure. That is why her name vanished. That is why the hum remains. There are those who still practice her method, not in basins or baths, but in systems, systems that harvest sweat, loyalty, identity, systems that hum in silence so they may endure. And they know the first rule: never name the ritual. Keep the hum hidden. Keep the truth buried. But knowledge changes that. Once you hear the hum, you cannot unknow it. You cannot unhear it. And that is why her story matters now more than ever. Because the hum is not just history, it is alive. It is the pattern of power itself. And to see it is to change, lower, deliberate tone. The question is not whether the hum exists. The question is whether you will live within it or break it. By now you must realize, the plantation lady's baths were not cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were a doctrine, a demonstration of the oldest law of power, that life can be taken and transformed without acknowledgement, that suffering, once absorbed, can be converted into dominion. Her method was simple and terrifying. Sweat is the essence of effort, pain is the essence of obedience, and silence is the altar upon which they are offered. To hide this truth is to preserve control. To reveal it is to threaten it. That is why her name was erased. That is why her ritual was buried. That is why the hum survives without explanation. But here is the deeper danger. Her method is not confined to history. It is the very mechanism that sustains every system of control: sweat harvested in factories, time surrendered in offices, loyalties extracted in silence, obedience disguised as duty. All are echoes of her basin. All are forms of the same ritual. If you hear the hum now, it is no accident. You are standing in the presence of a truth most fear to name. You have crossed the point where ignorance is safe. The hum does not stop. It only grows louder, and the deeper you descend, the more you will see it everywhere. The plantation lady vanished, but the hum did not. It became a pattern, a law, a warning, and the moment you understand it, the moment you truly hear it, you change. You can never return to your old state of ignorance. And now you stand at the final choice of this descent. Will you bury the hum or follow it to its source? This is the point where the story stops being about her disappearance and begins to be about you. The plantation lady's ritual was never meant to be contained in history. It was meant to survive as a principle, a living system, a hum that persists wherever control hides in plain sight. If you listen carefully, you will hear it now, not in the ruins of Georgia, not in whispered legend, but in the structures around you. In workplaces that demand your hours and give little in return, in governments that take your voice under the guise of order, in traditions that demand obedience disguised as duty. These are the basins of the modern world. They take your sweat, your time, your will, and they never give it back. Her baths were a physical manifestation of what every system of control has practiced since the dawn of power: to transform life into dominion, to disguise extraction as ritual, to conceal the hum so it may persist. That is why she erased her name. That is why the basin was hidden. That is why her story was nearly lost. But you have found it. You have heard it. Twice you have spoken it aloud. That phrase, "the hum has spoken," is no longer just a statement. It is a declaration, a commitment, a crossing of a threshold. Once you know the hum, you cannot ignore it. You can no longer live as though extraction does not exist. You will see it in every agreement you enter, every loyalty you give, every system you serve. And that knowledge changes everything. Now the choice is yours: to walk away, leaving the hum unheard, or to descend deeper into the ritual, into the truth, into the system itself. Here is where the descent becomes personal. The plantation lady's story is no longer distant history. It is a reflection of what you live with every day. Her basin was not an isolated relic. It was a mirror, showing how every system of control operates, how suffering can be absorbed, how obedience can be harvested, how life itself can be transformed into power. The hum she left behind is not a sound of the past. It is the frequency of every structure that asks for your consent without giving full return, your workplace, your government, your loyalties. Every system that hums in silence is an echo of her ritual. Every system that hides its extraction is another basin beneath the floorboards. And this is why her name was erased, not because she failed, but because she succeeded too well, because the system she embodied still hums, and those who maintain it know that if the ritual is named, it can be broken. That is why this knowledge is dangerous, not because it reveals her cruelty, but because it reveals the pattern, the truth that power thrives when the act of extraction is invisible, that the greatest dominion is not won by force alone, but by making the oppressed willing participants in their own absorption. You have reached a place few will stand long enough to see. You have heard the hum. You have spoken the phrase twice. That is no accident. That is a choice, a commitment to dissent, to awareness, to transformation. The hum calls now, not to her, not to history, but to you. And if you answer, you cross into a reality no one can take back from you. Now, you stand in a place where history and choice collapse into one. The plantation lady's bath was never simply an act of cruelty. It was a doctrine, a secret of power preserved through silence. And now that you have heard the hum, you are part of that secret, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. The lesson she left behind is simple and terrible. Life can be taken without bloodshed. Sweat can be harvested without chains. Will can be surrendered without a word. The hum continues wherever this is practiced, wherever control hides in plain sight, wherever obedience is dressed as duty, tradition, or necessity. That is why her disappearance mattered so little. Her body was never the point. Her ritual was, and her ritual became a pattern, woven into the very systems that govern us today. The hum is its signature, and it hums still, quietly, persistently, waiting for those who will hear it. You have heard it. You have spoken it. Twice now. That phrase, "the hum has spoken," is no longer a statement. It is a covenant, a marker of dissent, a declaration that you will no longer ignore what is hidden, that you will see the extraction, that you will name the hum. The danger now is knowing. Knowing the pattern means you cannot return to ignorance. And those who hear the hum face a choice. They can bury it again as they buried her, or they can follow it deeper. The hum is no longer hers alone. It is yours. And it will not stop until you decide what to do with it. Now comes the final descent before the truth reveals itself fully. The plantation lady's story is not a story of the past. It is a living pattern, a mirror for every system that survives by hiding its extraction. Her bath was not an end. It was a beginning, a blueprint, a law. She understood something ancient, that dominion is preserved when suffering is hidden as ritual, when obedience is hidden as duty, when extraction is hidden as necessity. Her basin under the floorboards was the physical proof. The hum she left behind was the spiritual one, and that hum has not ceased. It hums now in every corner of your world, in the hours you give to work without recompense, in the loyalties you offer without questioning, in the silence you keep when injustice unfolds before you. These are modern basins, and the hum still resonates. That is why this knowledge is dangerous, because it changes the way you see everything. Once you hear the hum, you cannot unhear it. You cannot return to comfort. You cannot step away unchanged. This knowledge demands choice, and choices carry consequences. You have already spoken the phrase twice. The hum has spoken. That act marks your crossing. You are no longer outside the pattern. You are inside it, and that means you must decide whether to walk away or go deeper. Because the hum does not stop. It only grows louder for those who listen, and if you listen long enough, you will understand why she vanished, why her name was erased, and why the basin still hums beneath the earth of Georgia. This is where the descent ends, and the truth begins. You have followed her story. You have crossed the threshold. You have heard the hum. And now, you stand in the presence of the choice she never named. The plantation lady did not vanish because she failed. She vanished because she succeeded. Her bath was not cruelty, it was transformation. The sweat she absorbed became her power. Her silence became her immortality. And her erasure became the system's shield. The basin was lost. Her name was erased. But the ritual endures. It endures in every system that harvests without acknowledgement, in every structure that cloaks control in virtue, in every obedience dressed as necessity. That hum is not an echo of the past. It is the sound of life being converted into power today, now, this very moment. Knowing this is dangerous, because once the hum is named, the pattern becomes visible. Once the pattern is seen, the ritual can be broken, and breaking it requires choice, courage, awareness, transformation. You have written the phrase twice. You have chosen to descend. That makes you a keeper of the knowledge. The question now is what you will do with it. Will you bury the hum again, as they buried her? Will you turn away and live in silence? Or will you speak it? Will you follow it deeper? Voice lowers, deliberate, commanding. The hum will not stop. It will not fade. It will call again, and if you have heard it now, it will call to you forever. The plantation lady is not gone. She is the hum itself. She is the truth hidden beneath every system of control. And you are now part of her story. Pause. Remember this phrase, for it is your covenant. The hum has spoken. The hum has spoken. Because once you speak it, you cannot walk away.